Hey, someone's been kind of rattling around my head since last time we talked.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, we were discussing China and Taiwan, that whole potential quick scenario, and we used the word unification quite a bit.
Yeah, I remember. Seemed like the standard term, given the context.
Right. But, see, we heard from some listeners, folks in Taiwan, actually, and that word, it really didn't sit well, like, at all.
Ah, okay. I can see how that might land differently depending on where you're standing.
Exactly. For them, it sounded way more like invasion. When you stop and think about it, the way China frames this whole thing, it does feel like it softens the language around actions that might be, let's say, not so peaceful.
That's a fair point. The official narrative often uses language that smooths over the sharper edges.
So it got me thinking, okay, why that word unification? What's really going on with the language here? And, what are the deeper complexities? That's what we want to get into today.
Makes sense. Welcome back to Sip and Talk. And we've got some interesting stuff to look at. There's analysis specifically on that term, unification, and its baggage.
Okay.
And then, we also have this really quite striking real-world case study. Mainland Chinese woman, let's call her Ya, married in Taiwan, who actually got deported because of things she said supporting unification.
Wow, okay. So a real person caught up in this.
Exactly. So the plan is to really sort of unpack what unification means to different people, the implications, the contradictions, using these examples.
All right, let's do it. So starting with the word itself, why does unification, for many Taiwanese people, feel so much like invasion? Our source, Taiwan Unity and China's Legitimacy, digs into this. It mentions the history, right?
Absolutely. China's military threats, they're not exactly subtle. There's a long history there.
And they even had that specific term, Wutong.
Yeah, Wutong.
Yeah.
Which translates pretty bluntly to military unification or unification by force.
So yeah, that historical context of potential force, it just hangs over everything. It's not like a friendly merger discussion.
Not at all. It immediately frames unification as something potentially imposed, not necessarily chosen or mutual. Coercion is kind of baked into the conversation from the start for many.
Right. And then there's this feeling of like inherent inequality in the word itself from a Taiwanese view. Unification sounds like a big fish swallowing a smaller one.
Mm-hmm. One dominant force absorbing another.
And when you hear the language the CCP uses, like that phrase, let me try this.
Yeah,
which means what? The motherland must be unified and will inevitably be unified. It doesn't leave much room for debate, does it?
Not really. It sounds very final, very deterministic, like the outcome's already decided no matter what people in Taiwan might want.
So it feels like it just completely ignores the agency, the self-determination of people in Taiwan.
Exactly. I mean, they have their own distinct identity. They've built a democratic system they actively participate in. So unification on those terms feels like losing control, being forced into a system they didn't choose.
Which kind of explains why, as our source points out, someone looking from the outside might hear unification and think, oh, okay, like Germany reunifying maybe, or the Koreas talking about it. Sounds neutral enough?
Initially, yeah. It can sound benign if you don't know the specific context.
But once you understand China's political language, the history of those threats, the Wutong stuff, you start seeing the very real risk of what it could actually mean. Annexation, basically. The end of that distinct Taiwanese identity and their democracy.
Right. Which brings us to the next question. Why does this term unification persist? Even with all these heavy negative connotations for the people most affected, the source suggests a few reasons.
Okay, like what?
Well, one simple one might just be trying to be accurate when reporting China's position. If you're talking about what the CCP says, you kind of have to use their words to represent their view properly, right?
Yeah, okay, sticking to the source's language, that makes sense for analysis or reporting.
And then there's just, linguistic inertia, habit. Unification has been the go-to term in media coverage for ages. It's almost just the default word people reach for, maybe without even thinking too hard about the implications sometimes.
But then the source hints at something maybe a bit more deliberate, that unification might actually be used strategically to, cover up tougher words.
Exactly, to mask intentions. Think about it. Annexation, occupation, invasion. Those words sound aggressive, negative.
Yeah, they definitely raise alarm bells.
But unification, it sounds almost constructive. Like you're just resolving some historical issue, bringing things back together peacefully.
Hiding up loose ends, yeah. Sounds much softer.
And this connects to a really interesting point the source makes about legitimacy, or ruling legitimacy.
Okay, legitimacy. How does that fit in?
Well, the source asks, why does the CCP feel the need to constantly emphasize its legitimacy, especially regarding Taiwan? It suggests maybe a kind of psychological compensation effect, meaning the more you have to insist on something, maybe the less secure you actually feel about it inherently. Like you're trying to convince yourself as much as others.
Huh. Like the person who keeps telling everyone how smart they are.
Yeah.
You start to wonder.
Kind of, yeah. Think about the constant repetition that Taiwan has been an inseparable part of China since ancient times. They push that historical line really hard.
But is that actually like a universally accepted historical fact?
Well, no. There isn't broad consensus on that, historically speaking, and certainly not in terms of modern international law. It's a specific narrative.
So all this talk about history and inevitable unification, it's partly for the audience back home in mainland China, too. For the CCP's own stability.
Absolutely. It feeds into this grand narrative of national rejuvenation, this great cause. It helps shore up support, maintain internal cohesion, maybe paper over other domestic issues. Claiming Taiwan as part of fulfilling a historical destiny is powerful stuff, politically.
So you've got this gap then. The international community is kind of ambiguous. The U.S., for example, doesn't officially say Taiwan is part of China.
Right. They acknowledge Beijing's position but don't endorse it. Strategic ambiguity.
But the CCP speaks with such certainty about its legitimacy over Taiwan.
Exactly. They basically use legitimacy as a tool. It's not just about history. It's deployed in political struggle, both inside China to consolidate power and outside, internationally, to pressure other countries and shape perceptions.
Trying to make what looks like expansion sound like just restoring what was rightfully theirs all along.
Precisely, framing it as a righteous act of restoring national integrity. It's a very calculated language.
Okay, wow. So unification is definitely not a simple word here. It's packed with history, potential threats, and political maneuvering.
Definitely loaded.
All right, let's shift gears now and look at this Ya case. The mainland Chinese spouse in Taiwan who got deported. Our source on the cross-strait marriage expulsion details this. It sounds like it really complicates that whole unification picture.
It really does. So, she had this YouTube channel, Tu in Taiwan, and she was apparently quite vocal supporting Wu Tong.
So supporting the military unification option we talked about earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And because of those statements, the Taiwan Immigration Agency eventually revoked her residency permit. This was back in March 2025, according to the source. They cited endangering national security or social stability. And then she was deported.
Okay. And she didn't just go quietly when she was back in the mainland.
Not at all. She got on Douyin, that's the mainland version of TikTok, and started claiming she was a victim of political persecution by Taiwan's DPP government.
Wow.
Yeah. And she went further, saying Taiwan basically treats mainland spouses like potential enemy forces, and arguing that since Taiwan is, in her view, just a province of China, they had no right to repatriate her anyway.
Okay, that's quite a stance. But the source points out some contradictions in what she said and did, right?
Big time. So on one hand, she's advocating for unification, saying one reason is so her kids could travel easily between the mainland and Taiwan.
Which, sounds reasonable on the surface, wanting kids to see family. Normal parent stuff.
Totally normal desire. But then...
And what?
Well, at other times, she apparently expressed concerns about the practical stuff if they actually moved. Things like school, Zixianji.
School connection or transfer, right, between the systems.
Exactly. And just general adaptation issues for her kids in the mainland system.
Wait, so she wants unification for easy travel, but she's also worried about the actual reality of moving her kids there if unification happened.
That sounds conflicted.
Deeply conflicted. It really feels like her ideological position clashed hard with the reality of her family's life and roots in Taiwan.
So what's the analysis? Why the disconnect?
Well, her pro-Wu-Tong stance could have been partly about, aligning with mainland nationalist sentiment, or maybe trying to get attention online, build her social media presence.
Playing to a certain audience? Could be. But the reality was she had 3 Taiwanese kids. Deep ties there. Being forced to leave them behind was clearly a huge personal blow, regardless of her politics.
And that idea about the kids just easily moving back and forth after unification, it kind of ignores the huge political divide and the massive differences in, say, Education.
Totally. It sounds more like an ideological talking point or maybe wishful thinking than a practical assessment of the situation, even if unification happened under Beijing's terms.
Let's talk about that social media angle more, the performance aspect.
Yeah, that's relevant. As a content creator, especially someone taking strong positions, you wonder how much is genuine belief versus, well, performance.
Right. Were those strong pro-Wutong views maybe amplified to attract eyeballs, particularly from mainland viewers who agree with that?
It's definitely possible in that online space. Strong opinions get clicks. But then notice how, when deportation became real, her narrative shifted. It became much more about her personal situation, the hardship, the separation from her kids, seeking sympathy. It's like the online persona met real-world consequences, and the focus changed.
Okay, so this contradiction. Praising mainland China's development, saying it's great, but not having brought her kids there before she was deported. Why? Our source on the expulsion delves into this.
Yeah, and it really boils down to practicalities trumping ideology when it comes to your own kids.
Makes sense.
For her children, Taiwan was home. It was the familiar, stable place. They knew the schools, the healthcare, the whole environment. Plus, you've got free compulsory education in Taiwan, generally good quality schools.
Stuff you can rely on. Moving them would be a massive upheaval.
Huge. You've got those potential school connection problems we mentioned, very different curriculums, teaching styles.
Right.
And then the whole niche issue in mainland China, the household registration system, that can seriously limit access to good schools and social services if you're not registered locally. It's a big deal.
And she knew about this.
Apparently so. The source mentions she even talked about school difficulties herself on Douyin later. So she wasn't naive about those hurdles.
Okay, so education was a big practical barrier. What else?
Family and legal stuff, too. Remember, the kids are Taiwanese citizens. They have their dad there, other relatives, their whole social network.
Yeah, you can't just uproot them easily.
Exactly. There could be custody issues, residency rules. Maybe the kids themselves didn't want to go. Taiwan also has child protection laws. It's complicated.
So her saying nice things about the mainland after being deported, maybe that was also partly about rebuilding her online presence there, keeping that audience happy.
Quite possibly. Reinforcing the patriotic image she'd built, catering to her new audience back in the mainland. It doesn't necessarily mean she thought it was the best practical place for her kids at that moment.
It sounds like she was probably very aware of the actual advantages for her kids staying put in Taiwan school, healthcare stability.
It really highlights this complex identity thing for people in her situation, doesn't it? Balancing her mainland roots with years of life and family in Taiwan.
Yeah. She might genuinely believe China's progressing, but that's different from thinking it's the best environment for her kids, who are Taiwanese.
Precisely. Her idealized view of unification, meaning easy travel, just seems to ignore all these real-world nitty-gritty obstacles. It feels more like an aspiration, a political statement, than a realistic family plan.
And what about money? Social support?
Good point. Going back to the mainland, potentially without a job or that online income stream she had in Taiwan, that could mean real financial pressure.
Whereas in Taiwan, the kids had access to social welfare.
Right.
Healthcare, education, subsidy.
Exactly. Things that might be harder to access or rely on in the mainland system, especially with in restrictions for non-locals. And don't underestimate the kids' social networks in Taiwan, school friends, family. That's huge for their well-being.
Rebuilding all that as a single parent in a new place, that would be incredibly tough.
For sure. So yeah, while Yaya might have been saying one thing politically, her actions or inaction regarding moving her kids suggest her practical priorities were very much rooted in their well-being in Taiwan. It shows that gap between the big political talk and the messy realities of individual lives.
It really does. The language, the politics, the person stories, it's all tangled together.
And those different views on unification really show how language itself is, like, a key part of the conflict. It shapes how people see the situation, legitimizes different viewpoints, and has huge impacts on real people.
So, okay, wrapping this up. We've seen unification isn't just some neutral dictionary definition. For many in Taiwan, it carries the weight of history, threats, a potential loss of agency. It's perceived very negatively.
A very loaded term.
And this Yaya case just perfectly illustrates the kind of contradictions you get when that big political ideology meets the everyday reality of cross-strait family life. Her words versus her likely actions for her kids. It shows that complex mix of belief, maybe online performance, and just raw parental concern.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? We really need to look past the simple political slogans and think about the human consequences, the lived experiences behind the headlines.
Yeah, it really makes you stop and consider how the words we use, the narratives we hear, actually shape our whole understanding of these incredibly complex situations. And the real lives caught in the balance. It's way more than just picking a word.
It truly is. Language is the lens, It frames everything.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive. Lots to chew on. We really hope you, listening, keep thinking about these things. Keep questioning the narratives around unification and similar complex issues.
Yeah, definitely. Always worth digging deeper and thinking critically.
All right, everyone. That's it for us today. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time. Oh, and hey, don't forget to subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe. And while you're at it, check out our old friend Micky's YouTube channel, too. He's doing some great stuff.
Always good to support friends. See you next time.